Welcome to today's BCS podcast. Today, our special guest is really a very special guest because he's also Brentwood Christian Schools Board President, Mr. John Keesey.
Hi, how you doing?
Awesome. And thank you so much for coming by today. I think it's a great opportunity, for our listeners, especially our BCS community, to kind of get to know who some of our staff are, our admin, our teachers, even some of the students, but more importantly, how they came to Christ. So to have a board member and our chairman of the board to be on today, I'm really honored that you're here. So thank you for coming by.
Well, thank you. I'm honored to be here. I appreciate it.
Cool.
I really do.
So before we get into your testimony, you have been on the school board since what year and what position? When did you become board president?
Well, I just recently became the board the chairman of the board. I started on the board, I think, around 2018, 2019. Served as operations chair until recently, and then, like I said, recently just became the chairman.
Awesome. Now, you had kids that attended Brentwood?
Well, we have two kids. Our older daughter, she went through public school, and she's been out, I think, since 2017.
Okay.
And then our younger one, Riley, he went here and graduated class of 2021. He started in the 8th grade and then went through all his senior year.
Awesome. And then did he go on to college after here?
They both did. She went to Lubbock Christian University, and she graduated there with a degree in communications, and she lives and works in Austin. And Riley went to Freed-Hardeman University, and he graduated last year with his undergraduate in kinesiology. He played baseball while he was there, was a pitcher. And now he's working to become a physical therapist. He's in graduate school at Ole Miss, and he's engaged to be married. His fiancée is a medical student there as well, so we're looking forward to that later this year.
Congratulations.
Thank you. We're very, 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 very thrilled, and she's a real wonderful girl and a great, wonderful family from Mississippi as well. So we'll
that
be
means
spending
it's
more
gonna be
time
tough.
there.
Yeah, I don't think you're going to move her from her family. Usually that makes it tough.
We'll see. We'll see where the careers take them, and
wherever
then maybe
the Lord
where that
leads.
takes us. I don't know. We'll see.
Oh, well, hopefully she comes here so you can stay here.
Now, yeah, it would be hard. I'm Texas born and raised, so it'd be pretty hard for me to leave.
Yeah, I get that. Having 3 daughters, you always
Right.
It's usually the daughters want to be closer to where mom and dad is. Although we moved to Texas, so here we are.
Right.
So with that, let's transition into your background. How you came to know Christ? How long have you been a Christian, and what was that like?
Well, my family's always been a member of the church. Church of Christ is something that runs pretty deep in my mom's side of the family. It's interesting. My mother grew up on a farm in West Texas. We still have that farm today, and it's about 26 miles from nowhere. It's in a little area called Tarzan, Texas.
Tarzan?
Yeah, you hear Jay talk about Big Springs all the time,
Right.
and growing up there and how desolate it is. Well, they've got hills, and Tarzan doesn't. I mean, it's about 50 miles from Big Springs, further northwest. And
But no jungle there.
No jungle. In fact, you got to hunt to find a tree. There's most trees out there somebody planted. That's what my granddad used to say. But my grandparents, farmed that from the mid-30s, and my mother was raised out there, and her 2 brothers. And so she came from, very small, non-congested, like I say, 26 miles from anywhere, was baptized in a stock tank, literally.
Oh, wow.
And my dad was from New York City, and so he was raised Catholic, and he went into the Air Force after high school and was stationed at Dyess Air Force Base in Abilene. My mother was a student at Abilene Christian University, and that's Nostradamus talks about when they meet, that will be the end. Well, it's you kind of wonder about it, farm girl and big city guy, but he obeyed the gospel even before they got married in the late 50s, and so I was very close to my mother's side of the family. He became a petroleum engineer. We lived in West Texas, Midland, Odessa, Monahans, that type of thing. And so we were very close to my mother's side of the family. So being members of the church and the Church of Christ is just something that kind of runs through that whole side. And I didn't know my dad's side of the family very well. And so there really wasn't, that much of an influence there from his side. But growing up in the church, predominantly there in Odessa, Midland, was baptized when I was 14. Golf Course Road Church of Christ there in Midland, Texas, where we went. And then, later on, went off to college and eventually moved down to this area and that kind of thing. So that's kind of how it ended up for me.
Okay. So as a young man, you grew up in a house of faith, right?
Yeah.
Both parents were believers. So how did it transition for you to where you owned your own faith? It wasn't inheriting it, because everybody's got a story to tell.
Well, that's kind of a long story. It depends on how far you want to go. I will say this: and I'm sure a lot of people can say this. It's an up and down story, right? It's not a. Let's just say that there are times that I haven't necessarily been as faithful as I should have, right? I was watching a prior podcast that you had with Jimmy Harper the other day, and he was talking. He made a comment about kind of being dormant. Well, I kind of got pretty dormant there for a while.
You were just working on your testimony.
Well, I think so. Yeah. Like I said, I was baptized when I was 14 and was a member of the youth group there. But later in high school, there was kind of a bit of a dorm. It's funny. Things don't just happen, like you snap your fingers and it's like, okay, all of a sudden I'm just not doing what I'm supposed to be doing. There's a progression there. And I think for me and my family, to be totally honest, that progression kind of started coming on. My parents got divorced when I was in my first year of college, or right at the end of it. But that marriage coming apart was happening for years before that, right? And so that kind of affected where we were and what we were doing in our faith and in church, and frankly, I just kind of had a falling away. I think they became kind of occupied with what was going on with their deal, and I kind of allowed myself to fall away. And that continued into college. I won't say I never stopped believing,
right?
But I wasn't an active participant either. And so it wasn't until later on, it's interesting. I laid out of college after my first year. I went back to Midland, and I worked in some restaurants. I worked in the oil field for a couple of years. Kind of figured out I didn't want to spend the rest of my life doing that. And I went back to college, got a 2-year degree in criminal justice, and then came down to Texas State, or Southwest Texas State, which is what it was then. Finished my bachelor's degree, and that's where I met my wife. She moved into the apartment next door to me. I was working for the sheriff's department, and she was a student, and I married the girl next door. We swapped our 1-bedroom apartments for a 2-bedroom once we got married, and that's where the faith began to start coming back. My wife is a very faithful woman. She was raised in the Baptist church, actually, and as time went on, and particularly as she got through school and we had kids, I will tell you that the real huge trigger for us was when we had kids. That was when we really began to say, we're not applying ourselves the way we're supposed to be. We're not involved in actively pursuing our Christianity the way we're supposed to. And that really was kind of a turning point for us, and it has been ever since. And I'm thankful for that. Is it kids that would necessarily have done it? I think we would have done it either way, but definitely kids had something to do with it.
Well, it's God's design, right, for family, for men and women to get together and to become one, and then to raise children. And when your parents divorced, they kind of broke that that cycle that God really wants for the family to flourish in. Similar story. My parents, I'm the youngest of 6. My parents split up when I was 17. So that rocked my world. I blamed God. So from 17 to 22, I was working on my testimony and making some poor choices. And then the Lord put Rhonda into my life, who was not just, I had the head knowledge, but no application. She had knowledge, but she also had the application. She walked the talk. And it's interesting how God puts the woman right into our lives when we need it. It's that stability. And then it's what God intended. That's not necessarily true for all situations, but it's similar to yours that God put a faithful woman in my life as well.
That's very true. Like I said, she was actually raised in a Baptist church, and we began Church of Christ when we got back. We got married and we started on our walk together. We did Church of Christ. Now she later obeyed the gospel and was baptized in the Church of Christ and based on Scripture. What's interesting, and that was actually after we had kids. It was one of those things that I think was weighing on her, for quite a while. And she came to me one day and she said, I think I need to be baptized again. I don't think it was the way that it needed to be. And so there was some study, involved, and there was some discussions with one of the ministers that we had there at the church we were going to at the time. And she was rebaptized, and it was, of course, wonderful, to see, wonderful experience. Taking that even further, her mother was Baptist as well, and attended Southern Baptist. She's 88, and she also began to question. And she would come to visit us, and she and I had some really interesting conversations because I usually will transport her back and forth to East Texas where she lives. And we would have a lot of conversations in the car or however we were traveling, and particularly about baptism. And within, I think, the last 5 or 6 months, she actually responded, and she was baptized as well over at our church at Westside in Round Rock. And so, yes, and even maybe to go even further back than that, my grandmother, talking about where my mother was raised on the farm. They're out in the middle of nowhere. Well, my mother was very open with me to say when she was growing up, her dad was not faithful. It was her mother that was taking her and her 2 younger brothers to church. And that faithfulness, eventually, my grandfather obeyed the gospel as well, and he was one of the most godly men I've ever known. So women in our lives, faithful women, are of utmost importance.
Definitely. As men, we're supposed to be the spiritual leaders, but boy, having that background
absolutely
of having a strong, faithful woman, especially who's always in prayer and who's consistent and really, I used to say, my wife, I go, sometimes I feel like you're my Holy Spirit. And she never liked that, but it was always a good thing in the sense that she's holding me accountable. She knows me, warts and all, but at the same time, she wants my best interest to be a godly man, and to lead our family well and strong, especially with having children. In our role as parents and helping our kids to transition into adulthood, but it's also to own their own faith so that it becomes real for them. And you're right. I used to tell our daughters, you got 2 ways of learning in life. You can learn by making mistakes or by learning from the mistakes of others. So usually it's always better to learn by the mistakes of others so you don't have to go through that painful process. But let's face it, we're sinners, right? And so we're going to make some mistakes on our own that we have to learn through. And hopefully they're not, it's a big one. It's something that we can recover from. But God uses those events in our life to make us more dependent upon Him and stronger in our faith.
Right.
And so we have a choice in how we're going to respond to whatever comes our way, and helping our kids to be able to see that and not being controlling. It's hard to do because we're a parent and we want to step in and help prevent something, but maybe God's using that for His glory and for their good that we can't sometimes see at the time.
Yeah, I definitely think so. I know, I think back to particularly my mother. I talked about my mother and dad, getting divorced and all. Well, she was a very faithful woman. And again, her family was too. My dad fell away more. He did, and I hate that, but it's just the way it is.
Right.
And they've both passed on, since then. But I think back to the things that I was doing when I was less than I should have been, right? And I think about what they witnessed with me, and that I think helps me somewhat in terms of dealing with my own kids, because they were very patient. They were her and my grandparents, who were very much in my life and very important, but they knew that there were things that I was living in a way that really wasn't where I needed to be, but they also realized that it was my choice, right, and I needed to make those choices, and fortunately, I will say this: I'm glad that my wife and I met, and that my life turned back in the direction that it really needs to, and my involvement did, while they were here to see it. Right. I'm very thankful for that.
That's awesome. And being that this is Testimony Tuesdays, our podcast where we highlight how, it's a God story work in our lives. And it's a God story, so that they were able to see you come around, right? Because not everybody does come around. Some people end up on that path and they just get further away. And Jesus says, those who endure to the end shall be saved. And what does that mean? Paul says, examine yourselves daily to see that you're in the faith. What does that mean? It means that those who are really seeking after the Lord will continue. You're still going to have those ups and downs like you were talking about, the peaks and valleys and the challenges. And we struggle through that as we continue to conform to the image of Christ. But nothing is wasted in God's economy, because he's always preparing us for what's next, and he's using that in our life for our good. We may not see it like that, but he is. And so looking back, like you said, and that your parents got to witness that you came around to that foundation that was laid. And my parents, they ended up getting back together, and so it was great to see that happen.
That's wonderful.
And so the story's never finished, right? We may think at the time this doesn't look good, whatever situation we're in when we're going through it, but God's not done. And so we need to continue to pray and to hope and to pour into people and hold each other accountable, but also encourage. We need to encourage. Christians shoot their wounded, and we got to stop doing that.
No, that's a great point. And, being in law enforcement, I was in law enforcement for over 30 years, and you see a lot of, you see a lot of good and you see a lot of bad. I really am completely of the belief that God's love is infinite. There's no limits to it, and I also believe that about sin. And so, and I learned a long time ago, I never would say, well, I've seen it all. That's because somebody will top it every time, both in goodness and in sin. But I think one of the things I did learn through those experiences over those years was that there's always a silver lining. There's always something to be learned. There's always something that you can use to strengthen your faith. And I really feel bad for those that don't understand that can't see that. And that's what faith really brings, is that, I think, that understanding. Like I said, it was an interesting career, and I enjoyed it. I'm kind of glad to have moved on from it, but and it's changed a lot, obviously, since I first started. But I will say that it was humbling in a lot of ways, and it did strengthen my faith.
And that is a good place for us to end, and we'll pick up next time because I want to bring you back and I want to get more into your role as working for the Texas State Police at the Capitol. I mean, I'm sure you got a lot of stories that you can share, and hopefully the good stories, obviously, not that, we're not looking for dirt. We're looking for the God story and how God,
Right.
even through what looks like it could be so bad and devastating, you're dealing with divisiveness like crazy, especially along the political aisle, but yet there's always that silver lining, like you said. So I would love to bring you back and have those kind of discussions.
I'm happy to come back anytime. I'd be flattered.
Awesome. Well, thanks a lot, John, for stopping by today, spending some time with us. I appreciate you serving as chairman of the board here at Brentwood. You're doing a great job. We love this school. We're firing on all cylinders. So it's great to be part of an organization that really is sold out to pouring into these kids so that they will be lifetime Christ followers.
I totally agree. I will say this in kind of closing. It was very interesting. Before I came up here, I was speaking to a guy that does some of the stuff around our house, heavier yard work and things like that that we ask him to do. And it turns out that he and his family it appears, will be coming to Brentwood next year. And
that's awesome.
He asked me, why? He said, your kids aren't there anymore. Why are you still there? And I believe in it. I believe in the mission. And we are there are great things going on here at Brentwood, and I do believe in the mission. And so, I appreciate everything that all the people here do to make Brentwood what it is. And I'm very flattered to be allowed to be a part of it.
That's awesome. And Jay does an amazing job. He knows the mission. He could repeat it in his sleep. And so he really wants to live by the mission. He imparts that to us, and we're excited about the mission. And I love the phrase, and we use it to close our show every time, is that every day it's a great day
To be a Brentwood Bear.
to be a Brentwood Bear. Thanks a lot, John.
Thank you.